I didn't move out because I wanted a divorce. I moved out because I wanted to stay married. We had been together for 40 years. 40 years of sharing a bed, sharing a bathroom, sharing a bank account, and sharing a life. We built the exact existence we were supposed to build. But somewhere along the way, the shared walls of our home stopped feeling like a sanctuary and started feeling like a cage. And the most terrifying part wasn't that I wanted to leave. It was that I didn't want to leave him. I just desperately needed to escape the suffocating weight of being around him every single hour of the day. I grew up in a house where marriage meant absolute, unquestioned merging. My parents didn't have separate hobbies, separate friends, or separate money. They operated as a single, exhausted unit. The goal in the 1970s, when I was coming of age, was to find someone, pool your meager resources, buy a house, and get to work surviving. When David and I got married in 1986, we followed that exact blueprint. We didn't have much. He was working in mid-level sales, and I was an administrative assistant. Every dollar we made was thrown into a joint checking account. There was no my money or his money. There was only the mortgage money, the grocery money, and the kids' college fund. Our entire identity was wrapped up in the physical space we were trying to build. When we finally scraped together enough for a down payment on a 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs, it felt like the ultimate victory. That house was the physical manifestation of our vows. We poured our youth, our energy, and our entire financial foundation into those walls. For decades, I managed the household economy. I balanced the checkbook, I tracked the retirement accounts, I made sure the life insurance premiums were paid. We sacrificed constantly. If he wanted a new set of golf clubs, we had a discussion about it. If I wanted to go on a weekend trip with my sisters, I weighed the cost against the property tax bill. We compromised on everything. We compromised on the thermostat, the television shows, the brand of coffee, the color of the living room rug. I believed that this endless, exhausting negotiation was just what love was. I thought the friction was normal. When you were raising 3 children and trying to build a retirement nest egg from scratch, you don't have time to analyze your emotional state. The sheer volume of logistics keeps you moving. The noise of a busy household masks the quiet loss of your own individuality. We didn't question the lack of personal space because we couldn't afford personal space anyway. Our finances dictated our closeness. I spent 30 years believing that compromising on every single aspect of my daily existence was the ultimate proof of my commitment. I didn't question why I always felt a low-grade exhaustion simmering just behind my eyes. I just thought that was the price of a stable, respectable life. Then the kids grew up and moved out. The house was finally paid off. We hit our mid-60s and the frantic pace of our financial survival came to a sudden, complete halt. We were supposed to be living the dream. We had done it. We survived the layoffs of 2008. We survived the inflation spikes. We survived paying for 3 college tuitions. We were standing on the summit of our lives, looking out at a fully funded retirement and a house that belonged entirely to us. It is 2026 now. I am 68 and David is 70. And for the last 3 years, the silence of this empty house has been deafening. Without the distraction of the kids and without the daily escape of going to an office, we were suddenly just 2 people staring at each other across a kitchen island 24 hours a day. At first, I didn't understand what was wrong. I just knew that I was always on edge. David is a good man. He is a kind husband. But suddenly his mere presence felt heavy. He was always there. I was always there. Every meal was a joint decision. Every trip to the grocery store was a shared errand. If I wanted to read a book in the living room, he was in the armchair watching the news. If I went out to the garden, he would follow a few minutes later to ask what we were doing for lunch. I started retreating to the guest bedroom just to have an hour where no one was looking at me, speaking to me, or expecting anything from me. Because we were living on a fixed income, drawing down from our retirement accounts, the financial scrutiny intensified. When you are no longer bringing in new money, every dollar spent feels heavier. We began policing each other's existence in ways we never had before. If I ordered a book online, he would ask if I couldn't just get it from the library. If he bought premium fertilizer for the lawn, I found myself calculating how much it cost. We weren't broke. We had plenty of money to live comfortably. But the proximity made every action visible, and every visible action became subject to an unspoken audit. I found myself holding my breath when he walked into the room. I started noticing how loudly he chewed his cereal. I noticed how he always left the sponge in the sink instead of on the rack. I noticed that he breathed heavily when he read the paper. Small, insignificant habits that I had ignored for 40 years suddenly felt like sandpaper on my brain. We stopped talking and started managing. Our conversations devolved into a series of logistical check-ins. Did you take your blood pressure medication? Did you call the roofer? What time is the plumber coming? We were living parallel lives under one roof, but the roof was too small to contain two separate identities that had finally been given the time to breathe. The intimacy died. Not just the physical intimacy, but the emotional intimacy. We had nothing to talk about because we experienced absolutely everything together. There was no mystery left. There was nothing to share at the end of the day because we had both been sitting in the exact same house all day long. The digital age only made it worse. With groceries delivered, errands automated, and every form of entertainment available on a screen in the living room, there was literally no reason to leave the house. We became trapped in a comfortable, climate-controlled, debt-free prison of our own making. I started having dark, quiet thoughts. I would look at him across the table and wonder what a divorce would actually cost. I didn't want to leave him. I still loved him. But I ran the numbers in my head. If we divorced, we would have to sell the house. We would have to split the retirement accounts down the middle. We would lose a massive percentage of our wealth to lawyers and taxes. The financial devastation of untangling a 40-year marriage would ruin both of our retirements. We would both end up struggling. The thought of doing that to him made me sick with guilt. But the thought of spending the next 20 years negotiating the volume of the television and defending my grocery purchases made me feel like I was suffocating. This wasn't supposed to happen. You aren't supposed to survive all the hard years only to find out you can't stand the peace. The situation worsened quietly. It wasn't marked by screaming matches or thrown plates. It was marked by a heavy, icy, polite silence. We became roommates who were faintly annoyed by each other's existence. I started manipulating my schedule to avoid him. I would wake up at 5 a.m. just to have 2 hours of silence in the kitchen before he came down. When I heard his footsteps on the stairs, my chest would tighten. The peace was over. The daily performance of us had to begin again. He felt it too. He started spending hours in the garage, organizing tools that were already organized. He started taking the car for long, aimless drives just to be out of the house. We were both actively trying to escape, but we were too polite, too conditioned by our generation's rules to admit what we were doing. The dependency on our routine was absolute. We relied on each other for everything, yet we resented the reliance. I cooked dinner because I had always cooked dinner. He managed the exterior maintenance because he had always managed it. We were trapped in roles we had assigned ourselves in our 20s, acting them out in our late 60s with a deep, unspoken exhaustion. The turning point was so small, so pathetic, that I am almost embarrassed to remember it. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late April. The weather was beautiful. I was sitting at the kitchen island, looking over our quarterly investment statements. I was trying to concentrate on the withdrawal rates. David walked in, opened the refrigerator, stared into it for 2 full minutes, and sighed heavily. He shut the door, walked over to the island, and started playing a video on his phone. It was some historical documentary clip. He didn't use headphones. The sound of a narrator talking about World War II filled the kitchen. He didn't look at me. He just assumed that because he was in the room, the space belonged to him too. He assumed I wouldn't mind. For 40 years, I hadn't minded. But in that exact moment, the sound of the video playing over my thoughts felt like a physical assault. My hands started to shake. I stared at the numbers on the bank statement and they blurred together. I realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that I could not do this anymore. I could not spend the rest of my life sharing my physical space, my sensory environment, and my mental energy with another human being every minute of the day. I looked at him. I saw the gray in his hair. I saw the hands that had built our life, the hands that had held our children. I loved him. I truly did. But I could not stand to be in the same room with him for one more afternoon. I quietly folded the bank statement, stood up, and walked out the back door. I sat on the patio furniture, staring at the lawn we had paid off, and I let the reality wash over me. I thought the problem was my marriage. I thought I was falling out of love. But sitting there, I realized the problem wasn't David. The problem was the house. The problem was the blueprint. I had spent my entire adult life believing that merging our identities was the highest form of love. I thought that sharing every square foot of space, every meal, and every dollar was what made a marriage real. I was wrong. Intimacy isn't measured by shared square footage. Forced proximity doesn't build connection, it breeds resentment. When you have to negotiate every breathing moment of your day, you aren't living. You are just managing a treaty. I realized that by trying to preserve the traditional model of a marriage, we were actually destroying our relationship. If something has no cost, like access to my time, my space, my attention, it doesn't get valued. It just becomes background noise. I had become background noise to him. He had become background noise to me. We had zero boundaries. And without boundaries, there is no self. And without a self, there can be no us. The breakdown of our old life started that evening. I waited until after dinner. We were sitting in the living room, staring at the television without really watching it. I muted the screen. "I need my own house," I said. I didn't plan the words. They just fell out of my mouth, flat and quiet. David turned to look at me, his face dropping in confusion. He asked me what I was talking about. He asked if I was asking for a divorce. I explained that I wasn't. I told him I loved him. I told him I wanted to stay married to him for the rest of our lives. But I also told him that if I had to wake up one more morning and negotiate what we were going to have for breakfast, I was going to lose my mind. He didn't get angry. He got terrified. The emotional strain of that conversation was heavier than anything we had faced in decades. He felt rejected. He felt like he had failed. He kept asking what he had done wrong. It took hours of talking and crying and untangling decades of assumptions for him to finally hear what I was actually saying. He admitted that he felt it too. He admitted that he felt like he was constantly walking on eggshells, worried about being in my way, worried about spending too much money on his hobbies, worried about existing too loudly in a house we both owned. But then the financial reality hit us. We had spent 40 years building our nest egg. The house was our primary asset. If we sold it and bought two separate places, the logistics would be staggering. We would be doubling our utility bills, doubling our property taxes, doubling our homeowner's insurance. We had to sit down and do the math. Could we afford to live separately without destroying the financial security we had spent our entire lives building? We called our financial advisor. We explained what we wanted to do. I have never heard a professional sound so utterly baffled. He kept trying to steer the conversation toward divorce mediation, and we kept having to correct him. We weren't splitting the assets, we were just liquidating the primary residence to buy two smaller ones. When we told our children, the fallout was immediate and brutal. They are in their 30s now. They have their own mortgages, their own families, their own financial anxieties. When we sat them down and explained that we were selling the family home to buy two separate condos, they completely panicked. My oldest son looked at me like I had lost my mind. "You're getting a divorce," he said. "Just admit it. Don't play these weird games with us." No matter how much we explained that our marriage was fine, that we just needed our own space, they refused to believe it. They thought we were hiding a scandal. They thought someone had an affair. But beneath their confusion about our relationship, there was a deeper, uglier panic. It was about the money. My daughter, the one who always struggled a bit more financially, finally snapped. "Do you realize how much money you're wasting? You're selling a paid-off asset, paying real estate commissions, and buying two properties in an inflated market. You are throwing away our inheritance because you can't figure out how to sit in different rooms of a 4-bedroom house?" Her words hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't entirely wrong about the math. It was an inefficient use of our capital. But her entitlement to our money, her assumption that our primary duty in our late 60s was to endure emotional suffocation just to preserve her future inheritance, clarified everything for me. We had spent our whole lives sacrificing our comfort for their future. I was not going to spend my remaining years sacrificing my sanity for their bank accounts. "It's our money," David told her quietly, "and this is what we need to do with it." The decision was made. The execution was exhausting. Selling the house we had lived in for 30 years was an emotional autopsy. Every closet we cleaned out, every box we packed, was a reminder of the life we were dismantling. We had to divide everything. We stood in the kitchen pointing at dishes. I took the good silverware. He took the everyday plates. I took the blue sofa. He took the leather recliner. It felt like a divorce. The logistics were identical. The only difference was that at the end of the day, we still kissed each other on the cheek. We bought two townhouses in the same zip code, about 15 minutes apart. We paid cash for both, using the equity from the big house and a portion of our retirement savings. Our financial cushion is smaller now. The margin for error is thinner. We have to be more careful with our monthly budgets because we are carrying the carrying costs of two households on a fixed income. Moving day was the strangest day of my life. I unpacked my boxes and my new, smaller living room. I set up my kitchen exactly the way I wanted it. I put the sponge exactly where I wanted it to go. That first night, I slept alone. I woke up at 6 a.m. The house was completely silent. There were no heavy footsteps on the stairs. There was no television playing in the background. There was no one to negotiate with. I made a pot of coffee. I sat in my armchair. I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized I had been carrying for 40 years. I survived the guilt of disappointing my children. I survived the financial anxiety of restructuring our retirement. I had my sanctuary. But the real test wasn't whether I could live alone. It was whether our marriage could survive the distance. It has been 8 months since we moved into separate houses. Our life looks completely different now. The financial strain of the 2 HOAs and the duplicate utility bills is real, but it is a price I gladly pay for the peace in my head. The strangest thing happened about 3 weeks after we moved into our separate places. My phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. It was David. He asked me what I was doing for dinner. He asked if I wanted to go get Italian food. It felt like 1985 again. We met at the restaurant, we sat across from each other, and for the first time in years, we actually had things to talk about. I didn't know what he had done that morning. He didn't know what book I was reading. The mystery had returned. The physical distance had recreated the space necessary for curiosity to exist. We started dating our own spouses. Now he comes over to my house on Sunday mornings. He rings the doorbell. I let him in. We have coffee on my patio. Sometimes I pack a bag and go spend the weekend at his townhouse. When he gets on my nerves, or when I just need absolute silence, I pack my bag and go home. We no longer have arguments about money because our daily finances are no longer entangled in the minutiae of shared living. If he wants to keep his air conditioning at 65 degrees, he pays his own electric bill. If I want to buy expensive organic groceries, it doesn't affect his budget. We eliminated the friction of small daily habits that erode long-term patience. The psychological shift from passive coexistence to active, chosen quality time has completely revived our intimacy. When I see him now, it is because I chose to see him. It is not because he is just the guaranteed background noise of my existence. I look back at the decades we spent forcing ourselves into the societal blueprint of what a marriage should look like, and I feel a profound sense of grief for the years we wasted being annoyed at each other. I thought about other couples we know, couples our age who are quietly miserable, sitting in separate corners of large houses, waiting out the clock because they don't want to upset their children or take a hit on their investments. I realized we had to preserve the self to preserve the us in a changing world. We had to dismantle the structure to save the foundation. I don't know if we handled this the right way. I don't know if everyone could afford to do what we did. And I know our kids still harbor resentment about the equity we spent to buy our freedom. They still make passive-aggressive comments about how difficult it is to visit 2 different houses during the holidays. The emotional residue of the transition is still there. There are moments when I am sitting in my townhouse alone at night, listening to the wind against the windows, and I wonder if I made a terrible mistake. I wonder if I abandoned the man I swore to stand by in sickness and in health. I just know I couldn't keep going like before. Our finances are tighter. Our children are confused. Our friends think we are eccentric or secretly estranged. But when David calls me, my chest doesn't tighten anymore. I smile when I see his name on the screen. If I had spoken up 10 years earlier, if we hadn't let the normalization of our shared misery go on for so long, would the financial hit have been easier to absorb? Would the kids have understood it better? I still don't know where the line between preserving your sanity and abandoning your shared life truly lies. I still don't know if it's possible to deeply love someone without eventually needing a door you can lock against them.